Hey guys, tonight we're heading back to a time when flushing toilets didn't exist. Personal hygiene was optional, and the scent of boiled cabbage lingered in stone halls for weeks. We're easing into the world of medieval castle, cleaning a job so thankless and grimy you'd probably survive 2 hours at most before plotting your escape. But tonight, no need to break a sweat or hold your nose. You're simply observing, quietly, sleepily. Picture yourself waking before the sun, long before the lords and ladies of the keep even dream of stirring. You're already moving through the chill of a vast echoing stone corridor, the air damp with last night's rain, your breath a visible puff as you trudge across the uneven floor. The torches lining the walls have long since burned out. It's your job to relight them, not with some fancy switch, nope, with a flint, aching fingers, and a lot of patience. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you feel like it, comment where you're listening from and what time it is where you are. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. First task of the day: fires. Everything in a medieval castle depends on fire heat light, cooking even the illusion that something is being cleaned by smoke. You move from hearth to hearth, poking last night's ashes, coaxing reluctant embers back to life, and adding kindling with a care born from experience. Too fast and smoke will choke the hall. Too slow, and the Lord's bathwater won't be ready in time. And trust me, you don't want to be the reason a noble has to bathe in cold water on the rare occasion he decides to bathe at all. Next, the chamber pots. Oh yes, there's no sugarcoating this one. Nearly every bedroom, even in the grandest castles, contains a close stool, which is a polite way of saying a portable toilet in a wooden box. And guess who gets to empty them? You do. The smell. Imagine week-old stew mixed with despair and a touch of roasted onion. The weight, heavier than you'd expect, especially the ones used by knights after a feast. You shuffle these pots carefully down to the yard, trying not to spill anything, not just because it's foul, but because the floors are uneven, and slipping means humiliation and possibly a broken leg. Outside, in the growing morning light, a few other workers, just as bleary-eyed, are already emptying waste into a deep cesspit near the outer wall. It's a bubbling soup of regrets, and you make a mental note to never fall in. It has happened. Historians still argue whether one unfortunate steward slipped by accident or was pushed for forgetting to bring warm ale to his lord. Once the worst of the chamber pots are handled, you head back inside to gather yesterday's rushes. Castles didn't have carpets. Instead, floors were covered with rushes or straw, sometimes mixed with herbs like meadowsweet or lavender. In theory, this absorbs dirt and smells. In practice, it creates a crunchy, fragrant, rat-friendly mulch that hides everything from crumbs to chicken droppings. You start scraping the rushes away with a rake, revealing sticky stains underneath. Was that wine blood ale? Honestly, you don't want to know. While sweeping, you spot a small scurry mice or maybe a family of beetles. It's fine. You're used to them. You pause for a moment to crush a flea between your fingers. One of hundreds. Your tunic itches constantly, and you've stopped trying to guess whether it's lice fleas or your imagination, probably all three. Eventually, you make it to the Lord Solar, the private living quarters. The fireplace here is enormous because comfort matters more in noble spaces. You tidy the room with a feather bundle tied to a stick, reaching up to dust-carved wooden beams 30 feet above your head. Dust rains down and you resist the urge to sneeze. You blink grit from your eyes. You're definitely getting soot in your lungs. Again, somewhere deeper in the castle, a rooster crows. It's later than you thought. The nobles will be stirring soon. You quicken your pace, straightening tapestries, refolding linens that no one will notice, and tossing another bundle of herbs beneath the Lord's chair. Last time, a rat ran out during a feast, and someone blamed the kitchen boy. You're not letting that happen again. The sun finally crests the castle wall, casting long beams of light across the main hall. Dust floats like tiny fairies in the air. For one absurdly fleeting moment, the place almost looks clean. Almost. Then a dog bounds through the hall, trailing mud from the stables. You sigh. You'll have to start again. But for now, you light the last torch, stretch your aching back, and inhale the sharp, smoky air. There's a strange comfort in knowing this mess isn't going anywhere. It's your castle's mess. You know every creaking step, every stain on the flagstone, every dark corner where spiders build tiny empires. You don't clean because it stays clean. You clean because it's your job, and because the day doesn't truly start until the castle is at least pretending to be ready for it. Now that the rushes are swept and the chamber pots have been emptied, at least for now, you turn your attention to the windows. Not that there are many. Most castle windows are narrow slits, arrow loops really meant for defense more than lighting. Still, a few of the wealthier halls boast larger openings, some even with primitive glass. But don't get too excited. These aren't gleaming panes like in modern buildings. No, these are thick, bubbly, slightly green slabs of glass set in lead, and they're more decorative than functional. Cleaning them is an act of faith more than results. You climb onto a rickety stool, dip a rag into a mixture of vinegar and old wine. Yes, that's the actual cleaning solution, and begin to rub in slow circular motions. The grime smears but doesn't exactly vanish. You step back, squinting. Does it look better? Maybe. At least the Lord won't notice. He never looks up before noon. Down below, the castle courtyard is waking up. You hear the blacksmith clanging iron into shape, the cook yelling at someone about burnt porridge, and chickens doing their usual early morning chaos dance. A few servants carry baskets of linens down to the river for washing. You grimace in sympathy. River washing is its own circle of purgatory. Inside the castle, another major task looms, cleaning the great hall. This is where everything happens: feasts, meetings, accusations of treason, impromptu poetry, battles. Naturally, it gets filthy. You drag a long-handled broom across the uneven floor, pushing a tide of straw crumbs, feathers, and occasional bone fragments toward the door. Sometimes you wonder if you're sweeping out dirt or just rearranging it to seem less aggressive. Mid-sweep, you find something unusual: a wooden spoon carved with initials, probably lost during last night's dinner. You pocket it. Castle law is simple finders, keepers, unless the steward sees you. Then it's confiscated for inventory, which is castle speak, for I'm keeping it instead. You move to the long oak tables, many still sticky with mead. Scrubbing them is a task you approach with equal parts elbow grease and resignation. The cloth you use is stiff with previous attempts. You dip it in a bucket of herbal water, rosemary and sage, if you're lucky, mugwort if you're not, and begin wiping in slow circles. The smell is bold, like an apothecary decided to wash its feet in ale. Still, it masks the worst of the grease. Historians still argue whether herbs were chosen for their cleaning properties or just for the illusion of cleanliness. Either way, it's your best defense against castle funk. Suddenly, your least favorite job calls the garderobes. Ah yes, the medieval toilets. These aren't chamber pots. These are the real deal stone seats, with holes built over a vertical shaft that drops waste into a pit or moat. Some are tucked into walls with cozy names like Privy Tower. Others, especially in fancier castles, include wooden seats and tiny chutes. You grab a scraper, yes, an actual tool designed for the job, and a bundle of dried moss. Toilet paper hasn't been invented, and sponges on sticks only exist in warmer climates. Here, you're lucky if someone doesn't try to reuse a linen napkin. You approach the first garderobe. The smell hits before the door opens. You push it open with your shoulder breathing through your mouth. The shaft is deep, and the bottom is bubbling. Probably rainwater. Hopefully rainwater. You scrape. You mop. You whisper a prayer to St. Dunstan, who supposedly fought off the devil with tongs and might appreciate this sort of labor. The door creaks behind you, and you freeze, but it's only the wind. Still you hurry up. This isn't a place you linger. Back in the hall, you notice someone has tracked mud across your freshly swept floor. You recognize the pattern. It's the boot of Sir Lambert, the knight who thinks cleanliness is for monks. You contemplate revenge involving salted meat hidden in his saddlebag. Instead, you sigh and sweep again. Next up, the kitchens. If you think things were bad before, brace yourself. Castle kitchens are chaos incarnate. The walls are blackened from centuries of soot. The floors are slick with spilled broth. You duck under a hanging pig carcass as you enter, narrowly avoiding a splatter of fat as a cook ladles stew into a pot big enough to bathe in. Cleaning here means scrubbing tables, wiping cleavers, and trying not to become part of the next pie. You spot a sack of flour knocked over and begin to sweep it up. A mouse darts out, bold as anything, grabs a crumb, and vanishes under a barrel. You nod in respect. Survival recognizes survival. A cook hands you a stack of dirty plates, wooden trenchers really. Most are just wiped and reused, but occasionally one is so gnawed on that it requires actual cleaning. You dunk them in a tub of hot water, scrub them with a fistful of coarse salt, and hope for the best. As you finish, someone calls for beer to be brought to the dining room. You help carry the barrel, careful not to spill. It's not for the lords, but for the guards. Hydration is important, even if hydration is fermented barley water. You pass the chapel on your way back. It's quiet inside, a cool, still room with faint incense clinging to the air. You step in for just a moment, not to pray necessarily, but for a break. There's a beauty here. Candles flicker light, catching on golden chalices and worn pews. You straighten a hymnal and brush some cobwebs from the altar steps. A little act of tidiness in a world constantly tilting toward mess. Back in the hallway, the steward barks an order. More rushes need spreading in the guest chamber. You sigh, pick up the bundle you'd left by the stairs, and move on. The work never ends, but there's something soothing in the rhythm of it, something meditative. Scrub sweep, scatter herbs, repeat. You think about how many people walked these halls before you, and how many after, all of them dealing with the same soot, the same smells, the same stubborn stains that no herb can hide. And somehow the castle still stands, still stubborn, still echoing with footsteps like yours. You shuffle back down the narrow corridor, bucket in hand, toward the guest chambers, one of the more dignified cleaning spots in the castle, though that doesn't say much. Guest rooms are less about luxury and more about not freezing to death. Still, they get special treatment, better rushes, maybe a nicer candle or two, and a perfumed sachet tossed under the straw-stuffed mattress if you're feeling generous. You pause to catch your breath near a window slit. Outside, the drizzle has started again. Of course it has. You wipe your damp brow with your sleeve and climb the spiral stairs carefully, avoiding the loose stone step halfway up the one that tripped old Agnes last month and left her with an elbow like a turnip. In the guest chamber, the hearth is dark and the air stale. You scatter the fresh rushes across the floor. These ones are woven with crushed lavender and thyme, one of the few scents that doesn't remind you of overcooked cabbage or damp wool. The room smells passable now. You plump the mattress a bit, though you know it won't help. The straw is old and crunches like autumn leaves. You fluff the pillow and chuckle softly. It's stuffed with goose down, but the geese had mange. You take a moment to straighten the tapestry hanging crooked on the wall, a faded image of St. George wrestling what looks suspiciously like a scaly cow. Dragons are hard to embroider, convincingly it turns out. Just as you're folding the spare blanket, a thick woolen sheet that smells faintly of lanolin, you hear a small creak. Behind you, the door to the next chamber has cracked open. Not because of a ghost probably, but because of a draught that flows through this wing like a lazy river. Still you step quietly to close it. There's a feeling you can't quite shake in these older halls, a sense that the stones remember more than you do. Historians still argue whether these drafts were accidental or clever design. Some believe they were early forms of ventilation. Others insist they were just the castle settling groaning under its own age. Either way, you've stopped jumping every time a gust flutters a tapestry, mostly. Now it's time to check on the laundry. You make your way down to the undercroft where linens are dried. Not much natural light makes it down here. It's damp dark and smells like wet socks left in a cellar, which, to be fair, is basically what it is. You reach for the wooden rack where yesterday's wash was hung. The shirts are still damp. You sigh. Firewood's too precious to waste drying sheets, so you begin refolding them anyway, hoping they'll dry on the bed itself. You pull aside a stiff tunic and notice a patch sewn on with red thread in the shape of a tiny heart. Some laundress's act of defiance, or maybe affection. You smile. Castle life may be rough, but it still holds tiny sparks of humanity. You're about to head back upstairs when the sound of sloshing catches your attention. You round the corner to find a tub filled with soaking garments. Some belong to the nobility, judging by the quality of the fabric. Others, judging by the smell, definitely do not. You grab a paddle, just a carved plank of wood, and begin agitating the water. The soap is made from lye and animal fat, and it clings to your fingers with greasy stubbornness. A small lump of yellowing linen floats by, and you poke it down. Doing laundry in the Middle Ages is half wrestling, half witchcraft. There's a trick you've learned to make it easier singing. Nothing fancy, just a soft tune to keep the rhythm. You hum under your breath as you stir the water. The sound echoes faintly off the stone walls. It's strangely comforting. The floor is slick, so you step carefully. The laundress last week slipped and nearly landed headfirst in the soap tub. She now claims she was baptized in lye and refuses to do any more socks. Honestly, you understand. With the linen soaking, you carry a fresh pail of water up to the buttery. This is not where butter is made. Medieval naming conventions are about as accurate as medieval maps. The buttery stores ale wine and sometimes milk. You open the door and brace yourself. The sour smell of gone-off cream hits your nose like a polite slap. You check the barrels. One of them is leaking from a spigot. You wedge a cloth under it to soak up the drip, then knock on the wood, mostly to feel productive. It answers with a dull thud, probably still half full. You leave it be and make a mental note to mention it to the steward. Then you immediately forget because you spot a wheel of cheese with a bite taken out of it. Again. You suspect the night watchman. He always smells suspiciously of cheddar and regret. You climb another set of stairs, this time to the solar, a private room where the lady of the castle might read so or pretend not to be bored out of her mind. You sweep up old thread and bits of dried petals. A few small beetles skitter under the rug as you shake it. You pretend not to see them. They're regulars. A copy of a devotional text lies open on the table. The script is beautiful but smudged. You gently dust the pages with a cloth. The candle wax pooled nearby has hardened into a soft green hill. You scrape it away and wonder how many prayers were whispered here, how many letters begun and never sent. By now, your knees ache. The bucket is empty again. You head down to refill it at the castle, well nodding to the stable boy who's brushing down a stubborn mule. He's muttering threats under his breath. The mule looks unimpressed. You draw up the water. It's icy and clear, and you splash some on your face just for the shock. Works better than coffee. You haul the pail back and glance at the sky through a window slit. Afternoon already. You still have half the castle left to clean, and no promise that anyone will notice unless you miss a spot. Then they always notice. Still, there's something oddly satisfying about it. You know every creaky stair, every smoky hearth, every broom handle worn smooth by 1,000 hands before yours. The castle is alive in a way. It wheezes and groans, but it holds steady. And so do you. You find yourself back in the main hall, bucket in hand, and a bit of laundry lint clinging to your tunic. The stone floor beneath your feet feels colder here, echoing every footstep like a quiet reprimand. Above you, the timber beams creak ever so slightly, a constant reminder that the building is old moody and not especially fond of your weight. The great hall is the castle's heart, a place for feasts, trials, gossip, and spontaneous lute performances of varying quality. But today, it's your problem because someone spilled something greasy under the high table. Again. You kneel and run your fingers over the rushes scattered across the flagstones. They're old and sticky, flattened under the boots of nobility and servants alike. You begin scraping the worst bits with a flat-edged stick. It smells like a stew made from lamp oil and regret. Historians still argue whether castles ever truly smelled clean, or if people just got used to the ambience, like how one stops noticing the scent of a barn after a few minutes. You toss the fouled rushes into a sack. Tomorrow they'll be burned or maybe used to line the bottom of a latrine pit. Nothing in the castle is wasted, not even the garbage. At the hearth, a servant boy is trying to rekindle yesterday's ashes into something resembling a fire. You toss him a handful of dried herbs for scent and a nod of sympathy. The smoke from the green logs stings your eyes and you fan it away with the hem of your apron. As you sweep around the edges of the hall, your broom catches on a broken tile. You stoop to inspect it and find something unexpected, a small carved figure tucked behind a pillar. It's made of bone, shaped like a crude rabbit, a child's toy, a lost trinket. Either way, it's going in your apron pocket. Consider it your reward for another morning without falling down the stairs. You shuffle toward the dais where the lord and lady dine. The table hasn't been wiped since last night's meal. Mutton grease, spilled wine, a half-chewed fig still clinging to the edge. You scrub it with vinegar and sand, the medieval method of choice. It does the job more or less, though. Your fingers end up smelling like a chip shop that's lost all hope. A bard wanders in as you scrub, plucking tunelessly at a lute. He's rehearsing for the evening meal. You nod at him. He nods back. Neither of you says a word. The silence is companionable. After all, you both know what it's like to be ignored until something goes wrong. The chandeliers above need tending too. You fetch a ladder, more of a glorified wobbly stool, and carefully climb it, wobble by wobble. The candles are stubs dripping old wax like teardrops frozen mid-fall. You scrape, swap, and sigh. Candle wax is the glitter of the Middle Ages. It gets into everything and never ever leaves. While you're up there, you spot a cobweb the size of a squirrel clinging to a corner beam. You take it down with a flick of the cloth, half expecting the spider to file a complaint. Back on the floor, you polish the iron sconces that line the walls. They're blackened with soot and in dire need of attention. As you scrub, a nearby herald strides in practicing a speech for the evening's feast. His booming voice startles you into dropping your cloth. It lands squarely in a puddle of spilt beer. You sigh and pick it up, wringing it out with the weary elegance of someone who's already wiped down half a castle and knows there's still the chapel to come. You take a detour through the pantry where shelves sag under the weight of bread loaves, cured meat, and dried herbs. The bread is hard enough to repel arrows, and the meat smells like it's halfway to immortality. But everything has its place. You dust the shelves and reorganize the bundles of time and sage their earthy scents, a rare comfort. You pause to inhale finally something that doesn't make your eyes water. At the back of the pantry is a door you rarely open, leading to the castle's smallest chamber, the oubliette, a forgotten little cell used more for storage these days than for imprisonment. The walls sweat in here, literally. Moisture clings like a wet blanket. You don't stay long. You straighten the pile of old linen stored here, then bolt the door firmly behind you. Best not to linger in places once known for permanent guests. You pass through the hall once more and check the side benches. Crumbs, mud smears, and something that may once have been cheese coat the surfaces. You clean them briskly, imagining what these benches have seen. Weddings, executions, ill-fated birthday parties with too much ale and not enough discretion. Historians have long debated whether castle cleaning was a full-time occupation or a shared task among lower servants. Evidence leans toward the former. Someone had to mind the constant churn of dirt dishes and dignity. That someone, in this case, is you. A porter walks by and grunts something about the stables. You nod and pretend to understand, but honestly, your focus is on the arched ceiling. Dust has begun to settle along the stone ribs. You'll need the long-handled broom again, but not now. Now it's time to empty the dirty water bucket for the third time today. You haul it to the drain behind the kitchens where a colony of suspiciously bold rats scatter at your approach. You dump the contents with a satisfying splash, careful not to drench your shoes. They're stuffed with moss for insulation, and wet moss is a personal hell. As you head back, your stomach growls. You check the kitchen where a pot of thin stew bubbles over the fire. You pinch a bit of parsnip from a plate and pop it into your mouth. It's lukewarm and tasteless. Still, it's food. The castle bell tolls from the chapel tower. It's late afternoon now. Sunlight, such as it is, slants in through the narrow windows, casting golden lines across the soot-smeared walls. You look at your hands cracked red and dusted with ash and smile faintly. The castle may not sparkle, but it breathes a little easier when it's clean. You take a moment sitting on the edge of the stone dais, letting your legs dangle like a child's. The work is endless, but not meaningless. You know every shadow and every creak. In a strange way, the castle depends on you not for glory, but for order, and that's enough. You wipe your palms on your apron and rise with a creak in your knees. The castle never really sleeps, and neither do you not properly. There's always something to scrub, fetch, or silently resent. Your next stop is the kitchen's a place of unrelenting heat, clanging pots and knife-wielding cooks who look like they haven't had a kind word since the last king. It's a bustling world of its own, nestled within the stone belly of the castle. And it's filthy. Always. The flagstones are slick with years of drippings and dropped broth. You step carefully, each movement measured like a monk avoiding sin. A scullion is gutting fish at the central table, and you offer a nod, stepping around the puddle of scales and fishy water pooling beneath his feet. Your task here, the ovens. Massive smoke-belching beasts of brick and iron that devour logs and patience alike. You start by clearing the ash pits, which involves crouching and scraping out mounds of charcoal dust that has ambitions of becoming part of your lungs. Historians still argue whether kitchen staff were more prone to respiratory illness than other servants, but the consensus seems to be if you worked near fire, you coughed a lot. One curious little fact: medieval kitchens sometimes used old bread as makeshift cleaning cloths. Not the soft stuff either, stale loaves so hard they could double as blunt weapons. You pick up one such loaf from a shelf, frown at its fossil-like density, and use it to scrub soot off the lower oven wall. Works surprisingly well, and you briefly entertain the idea of writing a cleaning manual called Ye Old Domestic Hacks. The cooks bark at each other over a dispute involving turnips and an unauthorized pinch of saffron. You keep your head down, dunk your cloth in a basin of vinegar and herbs, and polish the brass pot lids that hang like medieval medals on the far wall. They gleam, catching the light and bouncing it around the room in soft flashes. A dog trots in, muddy, mangy, and quite confident in his right to exist here. You gently usher him back out with your broom, only to have him return seconds later and curl up under a prep table like a particularly hairy onion. In the corner, a young boy is using a long-handled ladle to fish something from a cauldron of boiling broth. You don't ask what it is. You don't want to know. You just clean the soot off the hearthstones nearby and try not to inhale too deeply. The pantry off the kitchen smells faintly of mold and desperation. You air it out while dusting sacks of flour and dried legumes. One bag has a tiny hole in it. You peek inside and discover a smug mouse making a nest from stolen oat husks. You scowl, tie up the hole with twine, and make a mental note to let the castle cat earn his keep tonight. Speaking of which, you hear the distinct shriek of a cat scuffle down the corridor. A moment later, silence. You hope the mouse met justice, or at the very least, got a stern talking to. Now comes the most dreaded part of the kitchen clean, the floor scrubbing. Armed with a heavy brush and a bucket of brine and soapwort, you get on hands and knees and begin to scrub. Inch by inch, stone by miserable stone. The water turns black before you've finished a single meter. You keep going, knuckles white, muttering to yourself about how at least the roof hasn't caved in today. As you pause to wring your cloth, the cook tosses you a heel of slightly less fossilized bread. It's the nicest thing he's done all year. You chew it slowly, letting the salt from your fingers season each bite. not bad. You wash the basin shelves next, making sure the ewers are neatly aligned. A sense of order in this chaos. You straighten a stack of wooden trenchers and give the ladle rack a once-over. It's crooked. You fix it. The cook glances over notices and grunts in what you generously interpret as approval. There's something oddly meditative about cleaning the same space every day. You start to notice tiny changes, how the soot creeps higher up the hearth or how a particular pot develops a new dent. It's like watching the castle breathe in slow motion. A boy drops a bucket. The clang makes you wince. Sorry, he mutters. You nod and hand him the broom without a word. No point in scolding someone already covered in bruises and flour. Toward the back of the kitchen, the cold larder beckons. You duck inside and instantly shiver. It's the only truly chilled place in the entire castle. Hanging meats sway gently from hooks like a grotesque wind chime. You clean the stone slabs where cheese and butter sit scraping off old drips and smudges with a horn-bladed knife. The cold is a small relief, but it doesn't last. You step back into the kitchen, and the heat hits you like a woolen blanket set on fire. As you mop the final stretch of floor, the cook's apprentice walks in with a basket of eggs. He promptly drops them, half a dozen little yolk explosions all over your newly cleaned floor. He freezes. You stare at him. Then you both sigh at the same time. Without a word, you grab the broom. He fetches a cloth. The cleanup begins sticky and ridiculous. And then finally, the bell for the evening meal sounds. The kitchen erupts into a frenzy. Trays of meat, platters of bread, flagons of spiced wine are carried off toward the great hall. The cooks shout. The scullions scramble. And you step out of the way. You stand in the corner and survey your work. The ovens are clean. The hearth is swept. The bread scrubbing method might catch on. You allow yourself a quiet moment of satisfaction before slipping out the side door into the cool corridor, leaving behind the roar of supper prep. One more space cleaned, one more day done, until tomorrow when the fish guts return. You move along the back corridor, your fingers trailing lightly across the cold stone as you head toward the guest quarters. Compared to the chaos of the kitchens, this wing of the castle feels almost sacred, quiet, hushed, expectant. The air carries a faint perfume of dried lavender and last night's firewood, and the rushes underfoot rustle with each careful step. Guest rooms are a peculiar part of castle life, always in use but never quite home to anyone. You're tasked with maintaining their illusion of comfort, clean linens, fresh herbs tucked into corners, and hearths that don't belch black smoke the moment a fire is lit. Of course, none of this guarantees that the visiting barons or bishops won't complain, but you can at least try to reduce the amount of sneezing caused by the dust on their tapestries. Today's mission, the southern chamber. It was last occupied by a minor noblewoman known for speaking only in Latin and for hiding sugared plums under her pillow. You open the heavy oak door with a grunt and step inside. The fire's gone out, leaving behind a smell of soot and a trail of cold ash. The bedding is a tangled mess, feathers poking from the seams of the bolster like tiny white quills of disapproval. You begin with the rushes. These were laid weeks ago and have started to decompose slightly. Nothing tragic, just a light, earthy funk. You sweep them into your basket and scatter a fresh mixed dried lavender rose petals. If you're lucky, sometimes mint, and always a healthy dose of crushed reeds to keep the floor soft. Historians still argue whether these mixtures were more cosmetic than practical, but you can attest firsthand they do help when someone forgets where the chamber pot is. Speaking of which, you eye the corner. Yep, there it is. Your next job is to empty and rinse it, a task that's never elegant and always educational. This one contains a delicate swirl of plum seeds. You smirk. So she really was hiding fruit. You take it out to the gallery and dump it into a slop bucket that will later be carried down to the moat. A surprisingly efficient waste system for a place with so few toothbrushes. Back in the room, you tug the sheets off the bed and shake them out the window. A cloud of dust escapes into the morning air, possibly causing a distant pheasant to sneeze. The mattress is stuffed with straw, and you fluff it with a practiced rhythm, listening to the faint rustle of mice evacuating to more peaceful pastures. You remake the bed, smoothing the linens with care. The noblewoman may be gone, but her chamber must remain ready. You even add a sprig of rosemary on the sill. It wards off bad humors, or so the castle herbalist claims. Possibly just a marketing tactic. The windows are thick glass, set in diamond panes and slightly warped from years of sun and wind. You polish them with a rag dipped in vinegar and rainwater, watching the world outside grow clearer with each swipe. There's a goose walking along the parapet. You both pretend the other doesn't exist. One of the more peculiar aspects of medieval guest quarters is the wall-hanging massive woven tapestries meant to insulate the room and show off one's wealth. This one depicts a unicorn being chased by knights who clearly skipped leg day. Dusting it is a thankless job. You use a soft brush and gently tap the fabric, watching a cascade of centuries float down like sleepy snow. It smells like old wool and stories you'll never be allowed to hear. In the corner you discover a pair of velvet slippers. You pick them up gingerly, soft worn, and definitely not standard issue. You leave them on the bench. Someone will probably come looking for them. Or they'll be eaten by the goose. 50-50. You move to the fireplace and scoop out the old ash. This hearth is smaller than the kitchen's, but somehow messier. Someone burned orange peels in here, maybe to mask a smell, maybe to summon citrus spirits. You'll never know. As you scrub the hearthstones, your mind wanders. What would it be like to be a guest, to lounge on feather beds and eat figs from silver bowls, to not have soot under your fingernails, or a list of chores as long as your arm? You allow yourself exactly 10 seconds of daydreaming before returning to the brass fire irons, which you polish, until your reflection looks back slightly warped and exhausted. Next is the writing desk. Most nobles travel with their own parchment and ink, but the castle provides a clean surface, a sand shaker, and the vague promise that no one has spilled stew there lately. You dust it, straighten the stool, and realign the candlestick so it doesn't drip on the edge again. Last time it fused someone's shopping list to the wood. You step back and scan the room. Better. Not perfect nothing in a castle ever is, but improved. You light a new candle and place it by the hearth, its flame fluttering softly in the breeze from the newly scrubbed window. One last task, scenting the linens. A blend of crushed bay leaves and chamomile in a cloth pouch tucked between the pillows. You press it into place like a secret, then close the bed curtains, trapping the freshness inside. As you leave the room, you glance once more over your shoulder. Clean rushes, smooth sheets, empty pot, lemony fire, almost like someone lives here. Almost. In the hallway, a young page nods to you, his arms full of folded tunics. Another guest arriving, you ask. He shrugs. Or someone left and didn't pay. Same thing, really. You move on toward the next chamber. There's always another bed to make, another chamber pot to judge, another aristocrat to bewilder you with their strange bedtime habits. But for now, the southern guest room smells of mint and maybe, just maybe, rest. Down the narrow servant stairwell, the air turns cooler, the stone steps curving tightly like a snail's shell. You descend carefully, holding the rope rail for balance, because the stairs have been worn smooth by centuries of tired feet. You've already survived the kitchens and the guest rooms. Next, it's time to tackle the bathing chambers. Yes, castles had baths. Not always the glamorous kind with rose petals and swan-shaped soap, but bathing was far from a lost art. In fact, many medieval castles had dedicated bath areas, sometimes tucked into a private solar, other times down near the kitchens for the sake of heat and convenience. You duck beneath a wooden beam and emerge into the bathing hall, a dim, warm chamber with stone walls stained slightly from steam and soap. Your first task, clean out the tub. This one's a wooden vat bound with iron bands, and it still holds a shallow puddle of murky water that smells faintly of rosemary and something suspiciously like onions. You're not here to judge, just to scrub. You roll up your sleeves and grab the brush. The sides of the tub are slimy. This is not an insult, just a fact. Castle tubs weren't drained like modern bathtubs. You ladle out the used water bucket by bucket until you're down to the last grimy inch. Then you scrub the interior with a mix of vinegar, ashes, and herbs, nature's very own questionable cleaning cocktail. The ash acts as a mild abrasive, the vinegar breaks up the grease and the herbs. Well, that's mostly for your sanity. There's a niche in the wall where soaps are kept. Not bars, but balls hand-rolled concoctions of animal fat lye and scented oil. You sniff one, wince slightly, and set it aside for the next bath day. Historians still argue whether these soaps were commonly used by the nobility or mostly reserved for medical washes. All you know is they smell vaguely of goat and marjoram. Behind the tub you find the brazier, an iron bowl filled with coals that keeps the chamber warm. It's gone cold since yesterday. You empty the ash and refill it with fresh charcoal, careful to keep the flint and steel dry. Lighting it takes a few attempts and a few muttered words that probably count as low-level spells. Eventually, the fire catches and the chamber glows with fresh heat. The ceiling above is blackened from years of steam and smoke. You make a mental note not to stand directly underneath the drips. Last week, a drop landed in someone's porridge. They didn't notice. You've never told them. To the side, there's a small bench for attendants. A noble rarely bathes alone. They need help with the soap, the rinsing, the ceremonial placement of dried flowers. If that sounds awkward, it's because it is. You once helped pour bath water for a visiting count, who insisted on being serenaded by a lute player standing in the corner. The lute was badly tuned. The count wept anyway. You wipe down the walls, which are tiled with rough stone. Not decorative, but easy to scrub. Above the door, a small window lets in daylight, or in today's case, a curious pigeon. You wave it away gently. No guests want feathered judgment during their bath. Next, you check the water barrels. These are kept in the corner, one for cold, one for hot. The cold barrel is nearly full, fed by rainwater, collected through a clever gutter system. The hot barrel, however, is your responsibility. You haul it to the kitchen fires, where it will sit atop an iron grate slowly heating until it's ready to be mixed back in. Hauling water is not for the faint of heart. It sloshes. It spills. It finds the top of your boots every time. But this is castle life heat. Your own bath, pour it with care, then hope no one knocks on the door midway through with a message about the bishop's saddle needing repair. Some lords preferred to bathe alone. Others hosted full-blown bath feasts. Yes, you heard that right. In certain courts, bathing became a social affair. People would recline in separate tubs, sip diluted wine, nibble on fruit, and discuss politics or poetry. Whether this was relaxing or a soggy exercise in passive aggression depends on the guest list. One peculiar cleaning tool sits in the corner, a long-handled brush with bristles made from horsehair. You use it to scrub the back walls and the floor. As you work, you hum a little tune, something the scullery maid taught you. It's supposed to keep rats away. You're not convinced, but you sing it anyway. The floor is damp flagstone, sloped slightly toward a drain hole that feeds into a crude trench system. A primitive plumbing idea, more clever than effective. Sometimes it works. Other times you find yourself ankle-deep in history. Near the hearth, you find a pile of towels, or what passes for towels. Strips of linen frayed at the edges but clean. You hang them on pegs to dry, and fold a few for the next bather. A little spritz of lavender water adds a final touch. You don't get many thanks, but you like knowing someone might sigh in appreciation before getting soap in their eyes. You light a second candle, set it near the tub, and stand back. The chamber glows with that cozy cave-like warmth. The fire crackles, the pigeon has flown away, and you've survived another bath prep without accidentally dousing yourself in lye. As you leave the chamber, your tunic slightly damp and your arms aching, you hear a voice behind you. Is the bath ready yet? You turn slowly. It's the steward's apprentice. He's grinning, already shirtless, and holding a bottle of questionable mead. You sigh. It is you say. Try not to drown in luxury. He laughs. You leave him to it. The morning sun slants through the narrow window slits, now casting long golden beams over the cold stone floors. You're heading downward again, past the main hall, through a side corridor, and into the shadows beneath the keep. Your next destination is less glamorous, but no less essential, the laundry quarters. Yes, even castles had laundry. Clothes don't magically clean themselves, no matter how noble the backside that wore them. And linens, an absolute battlefield of sweat soot, grease, and mystery stains. It's your job to make them less horrifying. You push open the heavy oak door and step into the launderer's domain. It's warmer here, the air thick with the scent of lye soap and damp fabric. There are troughs against the walls, each filled with cloudy water. A large copper cauldron bubbles softly in the corner, tended by a woman with sleeves rolled up past her elbows, and an expression that suggests she hasn't slept since Michaelmas. She gives you a look. You here to help, or just snooping again? You raise your hands in peace. Help. Definitely help. She snorts and hands you a wooden paddle longer than your arm. Your task stirring the stew. Not a meat stew, alas, but a grim mix of boiling water, lye, and castle linens. It smells like soapsocks and a hint of despair. Lye, as it turns out, is not the friendliest substance. It's made from ashes, soaked in water, and it's strong enough to strip grease from wool and possibly peel paint off a dragon. You keep your sleeves down and your grip firm. As you stir, steam curls up and dampens your face. You blink through it, focusing on the cloth bobbing in the murky bath like soggy ghosts. This is how stains were lifted: heat, lye, and elbow grease. Historians still argue whether fine fabrics were truly boiled or only steeped, but your nose tells you this pot doesn't discriminate. After a while, the laundress signals you to pull out a load. You haul dripping sheets from the cauldron with long tongs and dump them into the rinsing trough. Cold water shocks the fabric and your fingers awake. You plunge your arms in, swirl the linens around, and hope the rinsing doesn't just relocate the stains. In the corner, another servant is laying clean cloth across wicker frames. These will be hung in the courtyard later to dry weather permitting. And when it rains, well, hope the nobles enjoy their sheets with an eau de mildew finish. You take a moment to appreciate how much work goes into washing just one set of bedclothes. This castle has dozens. Servants change sheets once a fortnight, at best, unless the bed's been visited more often, if you catch the drift, and if you don't consider yourself blessed. A narrow shelf holds a variety of soap balls, just like in the baths, but some are specially mixed for laundry. One contains grated chalk and rosemary, supposedly to whiten cloth and repel insects. Another smells like old ale. You ask about it, and the laundress shrugs. Experiment, she says. Better than the one we made with fish oil. You move next to the scrubbing bench, a wooden board with ridges carved into it. Here more delicate linens are scrubbed by hand. You roll up your sleeves and get to work, dipping a tunic in warm water, then rubbing it across the board in slow, steady strokes. Your hands quickly go numb. The soap stings your cuticles, but the tunic starts to brighten the stain from what might have been gravy or ink or blood you're not asking, fading with each pass. In between strokes, you notice a small pile of mended garments. The laundry room is also where torn tunics and split hose come for repairs. A basket of thread and needles sits nearby, and someone has embroidered a tiny clover near the hem of a shirt. You smile. Even in a castle's lowest chambers, someone finds a way to add a touch of kindness. You carry the cleaned linens out to the courtyard where lines of rope stretch between poles. You hang each sheet with care, feeling the morning breeze tug at the fabric like playful spirits. It's oddly peaceful out here, watching the castle's secrets flutter in the wind. Back inside, you're shown the final step, starching. Linens for the great hall must look crisp, especially napkins which are folded into elaborate shapes. One unfortunate footman was once scolded because his swan-shaped napkin looked more like a disgruntled goose. Since then, you've taken it upon yourself to practice folding with damp scraps. Your current attempt resembles a lopsided squirrel. You call it a victory. The laundress wipes sweat from her brow and motions to a clean pile. Take those up to the guest chambers, would you? And try not to drop them in the rushes this time. You nod, gather the warm, fragrant bundle in your arms, and begin the trek back upstairs. The laundry never ends, and you haven't even gotten to your own tunic, which by now smells like boiled socks and singed hair. Still, the work is oddly soothing, rhythmic, honest. You pass the steward in the hallway, and he nods approvingly. Clean sheets for Lord Bertrand. You nod back, fresh and folded. He winks. You're a miracle. You smile. Not quite. Just someone trying not to lose their mind while wringing out medieval underpants. Upstairs again, but this time not to polish goblets or scrub soot from the hearth. No, now it's time to tackle something even more nerve-wracking, the private chambers of nobility. You stand before a carved wooden door, linens in hand, heart slightly pounding. This is Lady Aveline's room, and she is particular about dust, about smells, about how the rushes are laid out underfoot. Yes, there is a correct direction for straw. You knock lightly. No answer. She must be in the chapel. Perfect. You push open the door and step into the chamber. The air smells faintly of rosewater beeswax and a little something you can't place, perhaps entitled disappointment. The sunlight streams through stained glass, casting little pools of color on the stone floor. On the far side is a large bed with a carved headboard and a tapestry hanging behind it, depicting some tragic tale involving a unicorn, a knight, and a woman who may or may not be allergic to sleeves. But your focus is on the mattress, a lumpy mass stuffed with straw and feathers, covered in a linen sheet that has clearly seen better months. Time to change it. First, you remove the old sheets. They're still slightly damp from last night's humidity. You try not to breathe in too deeply. The castle's walls may be thick, but they're not immune to mildew or the occasional bedbug. You give the mattress a brisk beating with your fists, partially to puff it up, partially to punish it for existing. Now the fresh linens. You stretch them across the bed and tuck them beneath the mattress with precise, practiced folds. A soft corner here, a tight crease there. You take pride in your hospital corners, though hospitals haven't been invented yet in the modern sense. And let's be honest, if they had, they'd still reuse bandages. Over the sheets goes the coverlet, a heavy woolen blanket woven in blue and gold. Atop that, a thin linen overlay. You fluff the pillows, 3 of them embroidered with tiny scenes of hunting dogs and flowers, and place them just so. Lady Aveline expects symmetry. While you're at it, you examine the stone fireplace on the opposite wall. A thin layer of ash sits in the grate. You shovel it out with a small iron scoop and dump it into a bucket for later disposal. Castle fireplaces aren't the romantic roaring types from movies. They're shallow, inefficient, and mostly good for producing smoke and the occasional warm elbow. You tidy the rushes on the floor too, replacing wilted herbs with a fresh mix of lavender, rosemary, and sweet flag. These aren't just for show. The herbs help mask unpleasant odors and discourage vermin, or at least that's the theory. Historians still argue whether these fragrant additions were practical solutions or just medieval air fresheners with delusions of grandeur. You pause and look around. Lady Aveline's chamber, while austere by modern standards, is positively opulent by medieval ones. She has a wooden chest for her clothes, a small writing desk with quill and ink, and even a hand mirror polished from metal, a luxury few can afford. On the wall hangs a small icon of a saint, and beside it a little silver spoon charm meant to ward off nightmares. You don't touch it. You've had enough weird dreams in this place already. Outside bells toll from the chapel. Noon. You glance at the window and see a servant leading a hawk across the training yard. A few courtiers stroll past heads bent in gossip. One of them slips on a patch of mud and pretends nothing happened. You salute their dignity. Back in the chamber, you arrange Lady Aveline's combs and perfume bottles on her vanity. A small glass vial holds oil of myrrh next to another with powdered iris root. You sniff and immediately regret it. That one's stronger than expected, probably used to deter suitors or encourage them depending on who you ask. You dust the table with a scrap of linen. You polish her candle holders with the corner of your tunic. You even realign the tiny wooden figurines she keeps near the window. Little animals carved by some childhood nursemaid long forgotten. You place them in a new configuration, a deer guarding a fox who is sniffing a mouse. A woodland drama. Just as you're finishing up, the door creaks behind you. You freeze. Comes a voice like satin wrapped around judgment. Better. You turn to find Lady Aveline standing in the doorway, arms crossed, inspecting the room like a general surveying a battlefield. She sniffs once. You hold your breath. This is the moment. Did you add chamomile to the rushes? You nod. And lavender. She steps across the floor, her silk slippers whispering against the herbs. She runs a hand over the fresh linens, fluffs a pillow, and smiles barely. Acceptable, she says. Then, after a pause, you may dust the antechamber next. You bow slightly and retreat with your cleaning cloth like a knight returning from war. Another battle won, another noble mildly pleased. You'll take it. You descend once again, this time with a broom that's shedding more bristles than it's sweeping. Your next assignment, the Great Hall, a space of grandeur feasting business, and in your experience, glorious sprawling mess. The hall greets you like a yawning stone giant, with banners swaying lightly in the breeze that sneaks through narrow windows. Light glints off the armor of the ancestral statues, lining the walls and high above the timber beams, crisscross like the ribs of a sleeping beast. Beneath your feet, the battlefield. Half-chewed bones from last night's roast, scattered rushes trampled into the stone, and, yes, a suspicious puddle near the dais that you do not want to investigate. You sigh, square your shoulders, and begin sweeping. This isn't your standard dust and go. The Great Hall is the symbolic heart of the castle, and that means your work here is as much theater as hygiene. First, the floor. You rake the broom through the rushes, dislodging bits of stale bread, lost buttons, and a dead beetle who seems to have lived a full life of regret. These rushes have seen banquets, duels, musical performances, and one unfortunate cheese fight. You gather the worst of the filth and dump it into a woven basket for disposal. Then comes the refreshing part, laying new rushes. These are more than straw. They're a medieval blend of soft grasses, sweet-smelling herbs, and a few local mysteries. Today's mixture includes meadow-sweet costmary and tansy fragrant plants thought to repel insects and evil thoughts. Historians still argue whether this herbology actually worked or was simply olfactory wishful thinking. You scatter the fresh bedding in a deliberate pattern, sweeping it evenly to cover every grimy memory the old rushes left behind. As you work, you hum quietly, something repetitive, almost chant-like. Not because you're enjoying yourself, mind you. It just helps drown out the faint echo of a bard's off-key lute solo still haunting the hall from last night. You move on to the high table, wiping down the carved oak surface with a damp cloth. This is where the lord and lady sit elevated above the others, both physically and emotionally. Crumbs from the morning's barley bread still linger in the grooves. You gently chase them into your hand. One bite, and you'd probably taste the entire week. On the benches below, you wipe away the drips of ale droplets of stew and a single smear of what appears to be blackberry pie or possibly boot polish. Either way, it's coming off. You dip your cloth in a bucket of scented water and go back in scrubbing, like your dignity depends on it. As you polish a particularly stubborn grease spot, you overhear two squires near the entrance talking about falconry. One brags about how his bird caught a rabbit mid-leap. The other unimpressed counters with a tale involving a hawk, a hat, and a duck that turned out to be a decoy. You suppress a laugh and keep scrubbing. High above the stained glass windows, filter in colored light, casting little patches of crimson, gold, and green across the flagstones. For a moment, you forget you're cleaning centuries of detritus. It almost feels peaceful. You glance up at the walls. Tapestries hang like frozen theater, their woven scenes ranging from biblical drama to outright fantasy. One shows St. George stabbing a dragon that appears more confused than threatened. Another features a lady offering a knight a favor. Some scholars say it's a scarf. Others insist it's a symbolic napkin. Either way, it clearly needed ironing. Dusting the tapestries is a delicate job. You use a long-handled swan feather duster, imported if you're lucky, and gently brush the threads without disturbing them. One too hasty swipe, and you risk unraveling a story that took a year to stitch. You pause at the hearth, the largest fireplace in the entire castle. It's big enough to roast a whole ox an event that, if memory serves, once resulted in minor injury and major indigestion. The ashes are still warm from the morning fire. You scoop them into a bucket and examine the iron grate. It's covered in soot and charred meat juice. Delightful. You scrub the grate with a paste made from vinegar and salt, handed down from one tired servant to another. It smells like disappointment, but it works. While you clean, a large spider scuttles from behind a log and disappears into the stonework. You salute its work ethic. As the hall begins to shine, your mind wanders. You think of the guests who will soon arrive. Traveling nobles with dusty boots and louder opinions, local merchants hoping for favor, perhaps even a bishop come to bless or lecture or both. You tidy the dais where minstrels perform. You fluff the cushions used by important backsides. You adjust the ceremonial goblets so their reflections catch the light, just so. Presentation is everything. Cleanliness is a close second. Someone enters. It's one of the younger pages, maybe 10 years old, dragging a bundle of firewood half his size. He drops it near the hearth and beams at you. You nod solemnly, passing on the unspoken wisdom of those who clean without glory. "Smells better," he says. "Don't jinx it," you mutter. He grins and trots off, probably to spill ink somewhere. The final touch, incense. You light a small bundle of dried herbs and wave it gently through the air, letting its smoky tendrils wind upward like a blessing. The scent of thyme sage and a hint of frankincense curls around the beams. The hall for a brief moment smells less like people and more like purpose. Or you step back, lean on your broom, and admire the transformed space. From filthy to festive, from chaos to calm. Tomorrow it will be a mess again. But for now, it is a throne room of cleanliness. And you are its quiet, unsung hero. You've barely had time to rest your aching wrists before you're called to a place less grand, but no less crucial, the kitchens. And if you thought the great hall was chaotic, well, brace yourself. The kitchens in a medieval castle are a beautiful disaster of fire grease and frantic survival. You enter through a narrow stone arch, ducking instinctively under a beam that has claimed the foreheads of many taller than average bakers. The warmth hits you first. Then the smell, a layered aroma of wood smoke, roasted meats, wilted herbs, and something charred that probably wasn't meant to be charred. A pot clatters. Someone curses in Latin. A chicken squawks in protest. You've arrived at the heart of controlled culinary madness. The kitchen staff is a blur of motion. Cooks, scullions, assistants, and one deeply suspicious-looking boy peeling onions with the desperation of someone trying to delay their inevitable demotion. The fireplace roars with open flame, and several spits are turning in slow rhythm, each loaded with a different mystery meat. In a corner, a massive cauldron bubbles with what might be stew or possibly glue, depending on who you ask. Your job, keep it all from sliding into an open sewer. You start with the floors. Here stone slabs are slick with fat drippings and dampened by the perpetual mists of boiling water. You carefully sprinkle sand, a medieval version of kitty litter, to absorb the grease before sweeping it up. It's gritty work, literally, but effective. This method's been used for centuries, though historians still argue whether it made floors cleaner or just creatively disguised filth. Near the back wall you find an abandoned bucket of fish heads and what appears to be a partially gnawed carrot. You scoop it up and toss it into the refuse pile, making a mental note never to ask about the menu again. You pass a row of cutting tables, their surfaces hacked and stained with the ghosts of 1,000 meals. Each has its own rhythm, the thud of cleavers, the shush of herbs being chopped, the occasional yelp when someone gets too enthusiastic. You wipe them down with vinegar and coarse cloth, chasing off flies and the whispers of salmonella. In the larder, you inspect the shelves, hanging sausages, wheels of cheese dusted in mold sacks of flour, and one highly suspect barrel of pickled eels. You check for signs of rodent activity, not because it's rare, but because you're supposed to pretend it is. You nudge a suspicious bundle and a tiny gray blur dashes off. You sigh and sprinkle more dried mint along the ledges, an old deterrent that probably just makes the mice hungry and refreshed. Someone calls for water and you pass a bucket along. It sloshes and nearly spills on your feet. You follow it with your eyes to the far corner where the scullery is in full swing. Here wooden tubs serve as dishwashing stations. Plates, goblets, ladles, all clunking together in tepid water clouded with yesterday's stew. You join the rotation hands plunged into water that's both soapy and strangely peppery. Scrubbing with sand and ash, you polish pewter plates until they shine, if only briefly. You pass them on to a boy with ears too big for his head, who stacks them neatly and immediately sneezes on them. You hand him a rag. He sneezes again. You hand him another. This is your life now. The drains are another beast entirely. Medieval castles didn't exactly boast modern plumbing. Wastewater flows through stone channels toward a cesspit or moat, sometimes clogged with grease bones and worse. You kneel beside the primary outlet and scrape away a plug of something that might be turnip, might be tragedy. The stench rises like a challenge. You hold your breath and wince. A toad hops by unfazed. There's a peculiar sense of rhythm in the kitchen. It's a symphony of activity, and you, though not the conductor, are definitely first violin in the sanitation section. You dodge a pot of boiling porridge, sidestep a hurled onion, and catch a rolling apple with your foot before it escapes out the back door. Someone claps. You bow. Lunch is winding down, but the cleanup has just begun. The remains of the feast litter every surface. Boned skins, scorched ends of meat, and dozens of dirty vessels. You organize the refuse scraps for the pigs, bones for boiling, and the rest for compost or the moat, depending on how optimistic the steward is feeling. You scrub the spit rods still warm from their recent labors. You soak them in a barrel of vinegar and herbs, not for cleanliness per se, but to remove the smell of last Thursday's goose from future roasts. Then comes the chopping block, a slab of wood, worn concave from centuries of abuse. You sand it with a rough stone, careful to remove splinters and the memories of bad turnip soup. One of the cooks offers you a heel of fresh bread as thanks. You take it. It's warm, soft, and utterly undeserved. You sit on a low bench, munching quietly, while watching the final embers fade in the hearth. The kitchen, for all its chaos, has moments like this where it almost feels sacred, like the cradle of comfort, however crude, A young girl sweeps behind you, humming a local folk song. You recognize it's something about a fox stealing a chicken and getting away with it. You smile. Even in this place of labor and grime, there's music, laughter, a kind of culinary camaraderie. You rise again, sweep in hand, and make a final pass. The floor is cleaner, the tables wiped, the air, while still infused with garlic and anxiety, feels lighter. Your job here is done for now. Tomorrow will bring another feast, another mess, another eel that somehow ends up in the butter. But tonight, the kitchen rests. And so soon will you. The day's not quite over yet, though. As the kitchen quiets, your next task draws you toward the castle's private chambers, spaces meant for rest, but not without their own challenges. You trudge up winding stairs that creak like an old dog's sigh, hands still smelling faintly of vinegar and charred meat. Here the floors are less stone and more wood polished, but easily scuffed by heavy boots and the occasional dragging of furniture. You start with sweeping away dust motes that dance lazily in the fading light. Cobwebs cling to ceiling beams like forgotten silk scarves, delicate yet stubborn. You wield a long-handled broom, coaxing the fragile webs free, without disturbing the hidden spiders who have called this home for years. You move methodically, aware that these rooms belong to lords, ladies, and sometimes visiting nobles, each with their own peculiar standards and quirks. One chamber features a canopied bed draped in heavy tapestries, the fabric thick with the mingled scents of lavender and old smoke. You smooth the coverlet, noticing tiny flecks of dried wax from countless candles burned low during late-night plotting or lonely reading. Medieval bedding was no plush affair. Mattresses stuffed with straw or feathers held secrets of countless dreams and occasional regrets. You fluff pillows knowing that only the wealthiest could afford goose feathers, while most endured the coarser, itchier alternatives. Historians still argue whether these less luxurious pillows were a nuisance or a secret form of back therapy. Beside the bed sits a chamber pot, a porcelain or sometimes wooden vessel discreetly tucked away. You carefully empty it into the garderobe shaft, a primitive early toilet system that sends waste down a chute out of sight. The smells waft faintly, a reminder of life's less glamorous necessities. You remind yourself not to linger here too long. A heavy wooden chest rests against one wall, locked but worn smooth by hands, rifling through clothes, documents, and perhaps the occasional love letter. You dust the surface your cloth, picking up years of accumulated grime and forgotten secrets. In a corner, a small wooden stool stands beside a wash basin. Water is precious, so you refill the basin sparingly, offering a chance for your lord or lady to freshen their hands and face. You dip a cloth in the cool water, wiping down the basin's rim, mindful not to waste a single drop. The window shutters are closed tight, keeping the chill at bay, but dimming the room to a sleepy twilight. You pause, noticing the tiny scratches on the sill marks from restless nights or hopeful lovers no one knows for sure. You trace a finger over them before moving on. You tidy the writing desk where quills, parchment, and inkpots wait for the next letter or treaty. The faint scent of old ink mingles with dust, a reminder that even in these austere rooms, ideas and stories are born. You arrange scattered sheets, smoothing creases and catching a wayward feather that's been left behind. Despite the quiet, these chambers bear the weight of life, lived intensely, politics, passion, and the slow passage of time. You imagine the whispered conversations, the furtive glances, and the lonely hours spent gazing through tiny windows at the changing seasons. As you finish, you lean against the doorframe, catching your breath. The castle feels different up here, more intimate, fragile, human. The day's grime has given way to a softer, more personal messiness, the kind that belongs to people rather than battles or feasts. You step back down the stairs, leaving the chambers to their quiet vigil. Tomorrow, the cycle will begin again, dust, dirt, and stories waiting patiently for your careful hands. As you descend back into the castle's lower halls, you prepare yourself for the next essential chore, caring for the castle's textiles and tapestries. These grand woven artworks aren't just decoration, they tell stories of battles, won alliances forged, and the family's proud heritage. But they're also magnets for dust moths and a rather persistent layer of grime that no noble can quite ignore. You find yourself in a long, dim corridor where heavy tapestries hang, their colors dulled, but still rich with images of knights, dragons, and sometimes a suspiciously fluffy cat perched in the background. You run your hand gently over one fabric surface. The threads are coarse, yet surprisingly soft, in places where countless fingers have brushed over the years. Dusting these textiles is a delicate dance. You wield a soft brush, sweeping lightly to lift away settled particles without damaging the fragile fibers. Historians still argue whether medieval tapestry makers intended their works to be washed regularly or simply left to age as part of the castle's character. One peculiar practice you come across involves beating the tapestries outdoors, an ancient technique to shake out dust and tiny insects. You imagine the awkward spectacle of hauling giant woven beasts through the castle gates for a thorough airing. Given the weight, this task was likely reserved for the strongest servants or unlucky new recruits. Moths, however, remain a persistent foe. You find small holes in one tapestry's edge, the handiwork of these uninvited guests. To deter them, castle residents would sometimes hang fragrant herbs like lavender or wormwood nearby, relying on scent rather than science to protect their prized possessions. You tuck a sprig of dried lavender behind a tapestry rod as a makeshift defense. Next, you turn your attention to the linens, bedsheets, tablecloths, and curtains that require gentle care. These fabrics, usually linen or wool, bear the stains of daily life, spilled mead, smudged candle wax, and the occasional unidentified blotch that no one dares to question. You carefully remove them, noting how stiff and coarse they feel compared to the plush fabrics of modern times. Washing these linens is no small feat. Water is hauled from the well heated over open fires and combined with lye soap made from wood ash, a harsh but effective cleanser. You recall tales of servants enduring the bitter scent and skin irritation caused by prolonged exposure to this soap, and you sympathize deeply. After washing, linens are hung outside on ropes or draped over wooden frames to dry in the fresh air. You imagine the gentle sway of white fabric in the breeze, a rare moment of softness amid the castle's stone harshness. Finally, you carefully fold the dry linens and return them to their designated chests. The folded stacks bring a small sense of accomplishment, a rare victory in a day filled with relentless grime. You pause near a window, watching the sun dip lower, casting long shadows across the tapestries. They shimmer faintly alive with the stories they hold. And as you prepare to move on, you realize that cleaning here isn't just about tidiness, it's about preserving history itself, one gentle brush stroke at a time. Your footsteps echo softly as you make your way toward the castle's latrines, the less glamorous but utterly essential parts of this medieval fortress. These privies are often tucked into thick stone walls or perched over moats, their placement a delicate balance between convenience and discretion. You peer inside one of these small chambers where the wooden seat bears the marks of countless visitors. Beneath it lies the garderobe shaft, a vertical chute dropping waste down to the moat or cesspit below. The air carries a faint, persistent musk, a reminder of nature's less poetic cycles. Medieval sanitation might not be what you'd call advanced, but castles employed a range of surprisingly effective methods to manage waste. Some had cesspits that were periodically emptied by brave or unlucky servants known as gong farmers. These workers carted away human waste under cover of darkness, a job both dreaded and necessary. You quietly salute their fortitude. To keep odors in check, you scattered dried herbs like rosemary and mint near the latrines. The idea of masking smells with fragrant plants is as old as the castle itself. You chuckle softly, thinking how this medieval version of air freshener beats modern sprays, though it's less convenient. Historians still argue whether some castles' garderobes draining directly into the moat contributed to waterborne illnesses, or if the constant flow prevented serious contamination. Either way, the design reflects a practical understanding of waste disposal long before plumbing became common. Your task also involves cleaning the chamber seats and surrounding walls with vinegar and sand, abrasive but necessary substances to scrub away stains and keep pests at bay. You grit your teeth through the unpleasantness, finding humor in how vinegar's sharp scent can almost make you forget where you are. Nearby, you notice a wooden bucket, part of a less common chamber pot system used indoors. These pots required frequent emptying and cleaning, another thankless chore that you're oddly grateful to avoid. You think about the awkward moments when nobles had to navigate these humble necessities, often assisted by discreet chambermaids. You finish by inspecting the small windows or vents that allow air to circulate, reducing dampness and discouraging mold. It's fascinating how such simple features made a significant difference in a place so prone to smells and germs. As you step away, you appreciate the mix of ingenuity and compromise that defined medieval sanitation. Not glamorous, but undeniably practical and quietly heroic in its own way. Your day's work is nearly done, but the final stretch brings you to the castle's outer defenses, the battlements and towers where the guards keep vigil. These stone sentinels face wind rain and the grime of war, demanding their own form of cleaning and upkeep. You climb narrow spiral staircases, feeling the rough stone beneath your fingertips as you reach the top. The wind whistles softly around the parapets, carrying the scent of damp moss and distant wood smoke. The battlements offer sweeping views of rolling hills, dark forests, and the faint glimmer of villages beyond the castle's protective reach. Cleaning here is less about dust and more about endurance. You sweep away leaves, bird droppings, and scattered dirt, aware that any slip could send you tumbling down a dizzying drop. The stone here is rough but slick in places, worn smooth by centuries of boots and rain. At one corner, you find the remains of a pigeon's nest, feathers caught in the crenellations. Pigeons were both nuisances and unexpected allies, carrying messages during sieges, but also leaving behind a persistent mess. You carefully remove the debris, noting how the bird droppings have etched tiny pits into the stone. You take a moment to polish the metal of arrow loops and window grates, using sand and cloth to remove rust and grime. These small details are vital, ensuring that defenses remain strong and ready. You imagine archers poised silently here, their eyes scanning the horizon as you work. Historians still argue whether the constant maintenance of these battlements was more about defense or the psychological comfort of order amid chaos. Either way, the ritual of cleaning here is as much about pride as practicality. Descending, you pass the castle well, its dark depths holding the precious water that fueled kitchens, baths, and sometimes firefights. You pause to wash your hands in its cool water, the day's dirt finally washing away. The scent of stone and fresh water mingles a quiet reminder of the castle's heartbeat. As twilight deepens, you look back at the castle's towering silhouette against the fading sky. Your hands may be tired, your clothes dusted with history, but you've played your part in keeping this ancient world turning smoothly. Now, as you settle down, remember that even the grandest castles owe their stories to the quiet, steady work of people like you, keepers of clean corners and gentle order in a dusty, bustling past. The castle's sounds fade as evening deepens, soft echoes, distant footsteps, the whisper of the wind through stone. You feel a calm settling in a gentle weariness that invites rest. Imagine the warm flicker of candlelight casting dancing shadows on tapestry walls, the faint scent of lavender and wood smoke curling through open windows. You breathe slowly, feeling the weight of the day lift with each exhale. The stories you've touched, the dust, the herbs, the creaking beams, settle softly into memory, like a lullaby whispered through centuries. Let your thoughts drift now, carried by the quiet rhythms of this ancient place, until sleep finds you easily and softly. Sweet dreams.